everyone, I'm going to show you how I propagate my insulin plants the easiest and fastest way. Propagating insulin plants is very simple and easy. Once you get a hang of it, you will really enjoy it. And you will never run out of the insulin leaves that you will need for your insulin tea and for your own insulin consumption. Not a lot of people actually know anything about insulin plant. I told my friends about it and they're like, we haven't heard of that plant. So when I told them the benefits of it, that it can lower blood sugar level, they get so interested and they wanted to try growing them. But then they keep asking me how to grow them. So they suggested that I make a video and so I can share with them. And there you go. Let me tell you a little bit about insulin plant. So they call it spiral flag or step ladder, maybe because of the spiral shape. And I have a plant here that has been growing outside for a couple of months now. And as you can see, it's spiral shape. And this is about 3 or 4 months old. And it looks beautiful when it is when the shape is spiral. But anyway, when you grow it inside, it's more upright. And this one right here is about 2 feet tall, and I have this for about 8 to 10 months now. So, and they said that it can grow up to 5 feet tall. They said that this plant has originated from Brazil, but now it's growing mainly in South Asian countries. And if you try to look it up online, most of the people who are doing research on it are from South Asia. And I believe this plant has been out there for quite some time now. It is a tropical plant and it's actually a wild plant. That's probably why it's so easy to grow. But it is a beautiful ornamental plant and we can grow this inside just like this one. I've been growing this inside for quite some time now. And I hate to use the insulin leaves. That's probably why I decided to propagate a lot of them so I have enough insulin leaves to use. And so I can save some of them for my ornamental plants inside. But the most important thing is that it has medicinal purpose and it contains several nutritional values. It also has antioxidant property, and that's why I love this plant. But anyway, they said that the insulin leaf contains carosolic acid that helps generate insulin in our body. And the scientific name is Castus igneus. So I learned 2 different ways of propagating insulin plants. The first one is through the rhizome that grows from the mother plant. And once the plant grows from the rhizome, you should separate that plant from the mother plant so it will continue to grow. And I'll show you an example of the rhizome. So this is rhizome here, and the baby plant is already growing from it. And also from the original rhizome, there is another small rhizome that's growing, and this is another possible plant. But anyway, I find it a very slow process, and it was not really giving me enough output that I needed for my insulin consumption. I found out that you can actually grow new plants from the cuttings faster than just by propagating from the rhizome itself. So I divided my propagation into 2 different stages. The first one is from the cuttings through water propagation, and then the other one is by separating the rhizome from the other plant or from the original plant so it can continue to grow, just like this one. And so let's get started. My first stage of propagation is water propagation. I prefer this method because if I had to use the insulin leaves for my consumption, then the stem where I get the leaves from, I can use them for my cuttings. Especially if I don't have time to plant them in a potted soil, then at least I can put them in the water right away. So the rooting process can start right away. So first we need a pair of scissors, a bottle, and of course the plant. I prefer using smaller bottle with smaller opening because it kind of help hold the cutting upright, especially if the cuttings are very short, just like the one I would make. I normally make my cuttings about 2 or 3 inches long, and so that's pretty short. And the smaller the bottle, the better to use for that particular cutting. And I actually found the smaller bottles from Walmart, and it's pretty neat because it kind of serves its purpose with a smaller opening, just like the test tube, you know. And I found this from the shelves where you can find those smaller items for the traveling kits are. But anyway, if you don't have those bottles, smaller bottles, you can actually use the empty water bottle. So what I do, I would just cut the top of the bottle, and then use the bottom for my cuttings. And so just like this one, especially if I have a lot of cuttings, then I just put them all in a cluster. So we're going to make cuttings out of this plant. Since this is a long stem, we could probably have about 5 or 6 cuttings out of this. And so what I do, I try to figure out the length of each cutting, and I normally just make my cuttings about 2 or 3 inches long. So you don't really need a very long cutting, as long as on each cutting there should be a node on it. So once you trim the leaves, then you will be able to find the nodes. And when I trim the leaves, I would leave a leaf or a couple of leaves on the tip of each cutting. So it will help bring food into the plant, just like the process of photosynthesis, you know. And I'll show you the nodes. So the nodes are where you trim the leaves from. So here is the node, and another node right up here. And so the roots will actually grow out of the node, and the rhizome will grow on top of the roots. Let me show you a cutting that has roots on it already. And this one is about 3 or 4 weeks old, and I just don't get a chance to plant them in a pot of soil. But anyway, look at the roots. They are really long, and they're growing out of the node, and the rhizome is growing on top of the roots. So, and the rhizome looks green, more green when it's growing in the water, but when it's growing underground, it's more like whitish color. It's more like ginger. So now I have 6 new cuttings that I can keep in my propagation corner. And also I have enough insulin leaves that I can use for my consumption. Welcome to my propagation corner. So this is where I keep all the cuttings that I put in the water for about 2 or 3 weeks, or until they are ready to be planted in a pot of soil. And I normally start planting them in the soil once the roots are about 2 or 3 inches long, and that way they are ready to survive in a new environment. And as of now, I probably have about 150 cuttings in this corner, and most of them are ready to be planted in a pot of soil. The roots, some of them, the roots are really long, and I guess you can see some of them, and those are ready to be planted in the soil. And these are my new ones right here. And so I set it up here in the laundry room so they can get enough light that they need. And I normally keep my light on day and night. Once the cuttings have been sitting in the water for 2 or 3 weeks, or the roots are about 2 or 3 inches long, then we can start planting them in the pot of soil. So they will continue to grow. just like this one. It has very long roots already, so this should be good to be planted in the soil. And I normally use smaller pots, about 4 or 5 inch tall, because we wanted it to be in proportion to the size of our very short cuttings. And the reason, because we don't want the very tender roots to be sitting in a wet soil for too long. So the smaller the pot is, then the quicker the water will drain from it. And in this case, we have to water the plant about twice a week. Since this is a very short cutting, so it must be a little bit challenging to plant, right? So what I do, I would fill up my pot first about halfway with soil. And by the way, I use my own soil mix, and I'm going to show you how I make my soil mix in my other video. And then I would plant my cutting, and it only takes about 1 inch for the plant to be under the soil. And so I fill up the pot up to the top, or once the plant is more secured, well secured in the pot. And so now this is ready for my hanging garden. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, once the new plant or the baby plant comes out, then we can start separating them, and that's gonna be our second stage of propagation. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video and you learned something about the insulin plant, which they call spiral flag. So thank you, and I'll see you again in my other videos.